It was around 2013 when I had this paranormal experience. We went to a school near a funeral home because we had rented the place for a dance practice. There were about 15 of us who stayed overnight at the school. The evening started off normal. We were laughing, playing, and practicing our routine. My friend and I eventually took a break and sat on the stage, facing the dancers. As we sat there, I suddenly felt an unsettling presence. It was as if someone was standing behind us, watching closely. A cold breeze repeatedly brushed against our backs, even though the air inside was completely still. It felt like something, was rushing back and forth behind us at an unnatural speed. My heart started pounding, and before I could say anything, our choreographer suddenly clapped his hands and told everyone to take a break. Then he walked straight up to us and whispered, "Did you feel that? They were staring at us, and the child is running behind you. Just ignore them." My blood ran cold at his words. He said it so casually, like it was a normal occurrence. I exchanged a look with my friend, who was visibly shaken, but we said nothing. An hour later, during another break, I looked up toward the library on the second floor, and my heart nearly stopped. A glowing figure stood there, staring directly at us. It was a woman, but I couldn't make out her face clearly. Only her eyes stood out, burning into mine. A chill ran down my spine. I blinked, hoping it was my imagination. But she was still there. Suddenly, my friend beside me grabbed my arm and whispered in horror, "You see her too, don't you?" I nodded slowly. We both turned to our choreographer, our voices barely above a whisper as we told him what we saw. He sighed, his face unreadable. "Stop looking at her," he said firmly. "Just pray, silently." He didn't want to alarm the dancers. We did as he said, but the uneasiness stayed with us for the rest of the night. The next night, we returned to the school gym for another practice. My friend and I went out to buy snacks and water for everyone. As we walked back toward the stage, my peripheral vision caught something moving. A shadow darted from the left corner of the stage to the right. It was fast. Too fast. I stopped in my tracks, my eyes widening. My friend saw my reaction and whispered, "You saw it too, right?" I barely managed to nod before panic took over. We both turned and bolted toward the guard's table near the entrance gate. Desperate for answers, I asked, "Sir, is this school haunted?" The guard hesitated, then shook his head. "No, of course not," he said flatly, but his expression told a different story. My friend needed to use the restroom, but the guard warned us that the lights inside always stopped working, so they no longer bothered replacing the bulbs. With no choice, I used my phone's flashlight to guide her inside. The atmosphere was suffocating. The air felt heavy, like something was watching us. Then, my friend gasped. "What?" I whispered. "Something touched my hair." Her voice was shaking. It felt like fingers. We were the only ones there. I saw nothing, but the terror on her face was enough. Before I could react, a deafening echoed through the restroom. One of the stall doors had slammed shut on its own. There was no wind, nothing that could have caused it. My friend let out a scream, and we ran out as fast as we could. We rushed back to the gym, breathless and shaken. My friend was crying. The choreographer saw us and frowned. "Did you see the woman near the restroom?" We froze. "No," I said hesitantly, "but we felt something." "What woman?" His expression darkened. She was there. She's angry. She's covered in blood. My stomach dropped. He then described what the woman was wearing. That night, after practice, my friend texted me while heading home. "I feel like someone is following me," she wrote. "I turned around, but no one was there." She ran the rest of the way home. The next morning, she called me, her voice trembling. "I had a nightmare," she said. "A girl, crying for help near the school." A classmate overheard us talking and suddenly asked, "Did you see her?" We turned to her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then said, "A gym instructor died near that area a while ago. It was a tragic accident." Shivers ran down my spine. We immediately texted our choreographer, describing what we had heard. He confirmed it, what he had seen, the clothes the woman was wearing, everything. It matched the description of the instructor who had died. We never practiced at that school again. I remember this experience like it was yesterday. About 25 years ago, when I was only 7, my family and I visited my cousin and her family in Sacramento on a Saturday. They lived in an apartment right next to a cemetery, with an elementary school right behind the apartment complex. The area wasn't exactly the safest, and even as a kid, I could sense something unsettling about the place. The air always seemed heavy, and my aunt's apartment had a strange atmosphere, like a lingering presence that didn't belong. My cousin, who was the same age as me, brought me and my older brother to the school's playground. My brother brought a basketball and played at the courts by himself, while I was playing on the structure with my cousin. We laughed, climbed the monkey bars, and ran around, trying to see who could jump off the swings the farthest. Everything felt normal, just another playful afternoon. Then, suddenly, my cousin stopped mid-laugh. Her expression changed, like she had just heard or seen something terrifying. Without a word, she turned and bolted towards the apartment complex, leaving me standing there, completely confused. She didn't explain, didn't say a word, just ran like something was chasing her. For some reason, I didn't question it or decide to follow her. Instead, I just sat on the structure next to the slide, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That's when I heard it. 2 voices, low and guttural, grunting into my ears from both sides. It felt like 2 figures were standing right beside me, even though no one was there. A deep chill ran down my spine as the sound reverberated through me. My heart dropped, and for a second, I felt like I was going to faint. Every instinct told me to run, but fear had me frozen in place. I managed to let out a scream, calling for my brother, who was still on the basketball court. He turned toward me, and before I could even tell him what happened, he suddenly took off in a full sprint. He didn't hesitate or look back, just ran like his life depended on it. Confused but terrified, I jumped down from the structure, my shoes halfway slipping off, and chased after him. When we got back to my cousin's house, we slammed the door shut, panting and trying to catch our breath. My brother's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "What happened?" I asked, still trying to process my own experience. "I heard banging," he said between gasps, "on the bungalow, over and over, like something was hitting it. Then I heard them. The same voices. They were chasing me." A cold silence settled between us. He had heard the same thing. it wasn't just me. We rushed upstairs to find my cousin. When we entered her room, she was sitting on her bed, legs crossed, staring at the wall. It was eerie, unnatural. We called her name, louder and louder, but she didn't react at first. Then, slowly, she turned her head toward us. Her eyes were unfocused, almost dazed, and she muttered something under her breath. We leaned in closer, trying to make out what she was saying, but her words were slurred, almost incomprehensible. Something about it felt wrong. It wasn't like she was just ignoring us. It was like she wasn't fully there. Frightened and unsure what to do, we backed out of the room and went to our parents, telling them everything about the voices, the banging, how our cousin had run off and now seemed completely out of it. But they just laughed it off, dismissing it as childish imagination. Dinner came around and we all gathered at the table. My cousin finally came downstairs, and just like that, she was acting normal again, as if nothing had ever happened. She laughed, ate her food, and carried on like the strange events of the afternoon never occurred. My brother and I kept exchanging glances, trying to make sense of it all, but we knew no one would take us seriously. Over the years, we never forgot that day. We've reminded our cousin about it countless times, but she always insists she doesn't remember any of it. Not the playground, not running away, not sitting on her bed in that trance-like state. And every time we bring it up, she seems irritated, like she doesn't even want to discuss it. It's as if that entire part of her memory has been wiped clean. That playground, that day, something unnatural happened. Maybe my cousin was so scared that her mind forced her to forget, or maybe something else was at play. Something darker. Whatever it was, it has haunted me and my brother for decades. The story I actually thought I had put up. Ah, well. This takes place in the late 1970s, around 1970, when I was 10. I attended a small country town Catholic primary school, a place steeped in history and tradition, taught by nuns who ruled the classrooms with an iron grip. The school was old, maybe dating back to the late 1890s, with its architecture reflecting its age. There was an old church on the hill, long since torn down. Solid classrooms built from heavy Australian hardwood like red gum and rosewood, and teak floors that creaked with every step. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was excited. I was spending the weekend with my best mate, Luke. If you've read The Old Packing Shed, you'll remember him. This was just before his family moved out to their grand farmhouse. They were a wealthy farming family, with both a house in town and land further out. We had come up with a plan. We were going to break into the school, which wasn't exactly a daring heist. It was just walking through the front gate. One of our mates had left a classroom door unlocked for us. Saturday morning came, and Luke and I rode up to the school. Luke had his own bike, while I was stuck riding his sister's, which was slightly too small for me. We dumped the bikes in a thick clump of lantana bushes and made our way inside. The door was still unlocked. We crept in, suppressing giggles, hearts racing with excitement. At first, it was just good fun. We ran amok, moving desks, scrawling nonsense on the chalkboard, and even hiding the teacher's cane behind the curtains. It took them 6 months to find it. Luke mucked about on the typewriter, tapping random keys and laughing at the old clunky sounds. That's when things started to get weird. Feeling adventurous, I wandered into the adjacent classroom. The moment I stepped inside, I was hit with an overwhelming sensation. like I had just walked into a crowded room. But the classroom was empty. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt them. A suffocating presence surrounded me, an invisible force pressing in on my chest, as if unseen children were watching me, urging me to leave. A deep, bone-chilling unease crept over me. The hairs on my arms stood on end. The room smelled stale, almost rotten, like something long forgotten. I couldn't move for a few seconds. Every instinct screamed at me to get out. I slowly backed away, not daring to turn my back on the room, and rejoined Luke, who was still lost in his typewriter antics. He glanced up and frowned. "Mate, you all right?" I nodded stiffly, unwilling to admit I was spooked. "Yeah, I just didn't like that room." Luke picked up on my unease, and without another word, we both hurried out. The excitement of our little adventure had worn off. We wandered around the schoolyard, but we had lost interest in exploring. The eerie silence of the empty school made us uneasy. Just as we were about to leave, something made us turn back toward the classrooms. And that's when we saw her. At the end of the hallway stood an old nun, but something was off. Her habit was wrong, not like the ones our school nuns wore. It looked ancient, like something from another century. The closest thing I could compare it to was the flying nun, but even more outdated. She wore glasses, and behind the lenses, her eyes burned with an intensity that made my stomach twist into knots. Her face was deeply wrinkled, her expression one of pure fury, as if she had caught us committing the worst sin imaginable. I could barely breathe. Luke gasped. "Oh, hell!" That was it. We didn't wait. We bolted, screaming like banshees. We tore through the schoolyard, scrambled through the gate, and didn't stop running until we reached the bikes. Luke nearly fell trying to yank his free from the lantana. I jumped onto his sister's bike, pedaling as fast as my legs would go. We didn't slow down until we were halfway back to his house. That Monday, we told the lads at school. Word spread like wildfire. 2 boys had seen the ghost of a nun. The story gained traction, and soon, it wasn't just our classmates whispering about it. Even some of the older kids said they had heard about a nun who still walked the halls. A few weeks later, I was wandering through the school corridors when I stumbled upon an old display of historical photos. Curious, I glanced over them, enjoying the faded black and white images of students and nuns from decades past. And then I saw her. I damn near shat myself. There, staring out from a faded photograph, was the cranky old nun. I bolted out of the room and ran to find Luke. Dragging him back to the display, I jabbed at the photo. Look at her." His face went pale. "No bloody way." We called over our other mates, and they all agreed. It was her. No doubt about it. From that moment on, we always referred to her as the cranky old nun. Years passed, and I eventually left that school behind. But the memory of that encounter never faded.